Again, this is painting on fabric. My name is Baron Raven Mayne. I'm the Laurel from Atenveldt. If you're contact, there's one of my email addresses. But if you have any questions if that don't get answered tonight, definitely you can email me or find me on Facebook. I have 2 Facebook pages that I'm on. I have one that's just my artisan page, which just has everything that I do art-wise, and the other one's my personal one. So, but if you instant message me, I should be able to contact if you tell me where you see my class. Okay, I get my acrylic. This is a list of supplies. So, and these are just what I use. You don't have to use these. This is not strict at all. If you find something that works best for you, anywhere down any of these things, feel free to experiment. But I use acrylic paint. It's usually folk art and Americana. That was before the pandemic. So a lot of things changed. One of the things of the pandemic that changed is a lot of companies went out of business. A lot of paints that I wanted to keep on hand, actually factories closed down and I wasn't able to get some paint. So a lot of things have changed since, over the past 2 years. But I use acrylic paints. I use a textile medium, and the textile medium basically keeps the paint flexible even after it dries. In the 70s and 80s that I've read in the craft books and before, they usually just added water. So a lot of when I first started painting on fabric, I used just water. But I realized that medium is really, if you don't want your paint to chip off of whatever you're painting, the textile medium is usually one of the best things. That's usually a 2-part paint to 1-part medium. But some mediums are different, so be careful of what you're buying. The acrylic that you would paint like on for a painting, like if you're painting on a canvas, is different than craft paint acrylic. So we got to make sure you see the difference in a craft store, because they have a lot of the same things, but they're not meant for each other. So they should be in 2 different sections, but just be careful, because there's a medium for the canvas that has different kinds of slowing in it, a slowing process in it, so that you can paint faster or slower or give you more time when you're painting on canvas. So those mediums are like slow, medium, and fast, and they let the paint stay wet longer. It's almost like painting with oils and things like that. So, but there's a textile medium just for acrylic paints. So just make sure that if you buy it, I have a picture of it later on. So I use usually short round acrylic or analog or chisel brushes, but you can use any kind of brush that you are comfortable using. Sometimes I use the ones that are for canvas painting. I don't use hair, like natural hair brushes, only because most of those the bristles will come off in the paint. So most of the brushes that I use are usually acrylic brushes too. But yeah, whatever you feel is good. Parchment, wax paper, or even old shower curtain, if you have one, is for what you lay down, so that whatever you're painting, over the table, so that you put that down first, and then you put whatever you're painting on top of it. You have paper towels for cleaning up. And have them within a certain amount of reaching distance, because if you spill or do anything, you don't want to try and scramble for a paper towel or anything when you made a mistake or you need it right away. So have that within, as close as approximately where you're sitting when you're doing painting. Got a water cup for brushes. Cleaning your brush off before you put it in the water is a good thing. If you can be able to do that off of paper towel, just so that you're not adding paint to the water. So the less paint, residue in the water, the longer you can go and paint, especially if you're changing colors and things like that. So it's so try and clean your brush off before you do anything. Small weights. Now, the reason I put small weights on here is because if you're putting your fabric, whatever it is, for whatever you're wanting to paint, it keeps the fabric from moving. You might not notice it right away that there's an issue, but if you snag the fabric or if you pull on the fabric and it jerks, a certain direction, the underside could smear. It could actually go through, depending on your painting. It doesn't always go through fabric, depending on the thickness of the fabric you're painting on, but just keep that in mind. So weights actually prevent it from moving around the table when you're trying to keep everything still. And some paint actually, as you're painting, will move the fabric So anything to keep it not super taut, but just, so it doesn't move around. For all my paints, I have small jars that I usually mix stuff in. I've actually been putting mediums in the regular 2-ounce acrylic bottles lately, just because it's faster and easier for me. If you have some paints like the Jacquard, which I forgot to mention, there's a paint called Luminaire. It has a medium infused in it, so you don't have to add medium to it. The trade-off of that is that Luminaire is a little more expensive. It does go a long way. It goes a lot better, a lot easier. It's like a more, I guess if there was something, it's a premium acrylic. And it has, like I mentioned, it has the medium already in it, so you don't have to worry about mixing anything. But they only sell it in certain, 2-ounce jars. And but I love the metallics. They have better colors in my opinion, metallic wise. Some of the other colors are touch and go, but their metallics are really, really nice. So I use a lot of Luminaire when I'm using, if I need a metal color, even like a pewter or a steel or any one of the multiple golds that they have. There are some fabric paints which I don't buy specific fabric paint. I don't, because they do have a section that has what's called fabric paint. Most of them, from what I remember, need to be ironed. They need to be set. The Jacquard used to say that, but I'm not sure if every jar says that anymore. But they need to be heat set. So most of the time when I'm doing clothes, when I'm painting on clothes, I always try and make sure I iron it and heat set it. One thing I've learned when heat setting it with an iron, though, is that you have to have something flat, like or smooth fabric, or something between your iron and the paint, and or painting on the back of whatever the fabric, whatever you're painting, because if your iron should be on low. If it's any hotter than that, it will actually melt the acrylic paint, and then that will come up on your iron. So you want to make sure first your iron is on low and warm, as low settings possible, which takes a little longer to iron things. But just keep that in mind, because it will, like I said, some of it will melt, and if you try and iron like directly on the paint, for instance, or too close, you might actually pick up some paint on your iron, which then will spread it over your entire piece. Besides paper towels, I also have pieces of cotton fabric, like old shirts, or whatever, because sometimes that seems to help with messes. If I have, I spill something on me, I don't have to grab a bunch of paper towels. I can just grab the same rag that I have, around, near me, that I could just like sop up if I spill something or whatever on, or clean off my hands really quick if I'm just want to just keep going. You want to have a good sized table, whatever you're going to paint on, whatever you're going to paint, make sure it goes on there. I don't have a picture of it. I was going to try and remember to take a picture of it. I have a picture of a dress that I painted farther down. And basically what I did is I fanned it out on a big table, or I put 2 tables together so I could fan the entire dress out to paint the border of it. And what I did is I would paint a section and then move my chair down, and so I don't have to move the fabric. I don't have to move the dress. I can just move around the table. That's all. That's usually helpful. If you can leave your piece, whatever you're painting on fabric, whatever it is, in one place and not move it, that is the best plan. That's my advice on your painting stuff. So I called this earlier the other day, living on the edge. I used extra fine point Sharpie to line my drawing first, paint it, and then I go back and I reline it. Now in Scribble, it's called blackboard, and that's basically what you're doing is you're going back and you're cleaning up all the lines and making everything look sharper, at the end of it. So I haven't had any problems with using a Sharpie yet on anything I painted, so far so good. If you're doing dark colors like black or dark navy, and you need to outline it for whatever reason, a silver Sharpie usually works if you can do that, and it seems to show up a little bit better, but you have to find the right things. I don't use paint pens. I don't use anything that says it won't run, because I've used it and it's run in the wash. So I don't use anything that says that. I don't use any paint pens for any reason, no matter what color it is. It's good for. but that's just me. Everybody's free to, check out their own stuff. So, fabric preparation. Wash all fabric in hot water. No dye, no perfume detergent. If you're going to put soap in it, do not put fabric softener, or when you dry it, don't put dryer sheets. I did that. I put that on there because when I wash our clothes, that's what I do all the time, because I want all my clothes to be soft. But when I'm doing something for painting, I try not to add any chemicals whatsoever to it, because I found that sometimes, especially the fabric softener, stays on the fabric, and it then becomes a border between the paint and the fabric, which means it has more opportunity to chip, to flake off or come off or not adhere when you need it to. I always, because I also do a lot of clothes construction, I make sure that everything's after I wash it, I put it in the dryer on hot, because you want, especially when you're painting on fabric, you want all the fibers of the fabric to be as tight as possible. The tighter they are, the less likely the paint's going to go through. From one, if you're just painting on the top of it to go way through. As a side note, if you're painting on fabric, you don't want to lightly paint anything, because you want the paint to adhere to all the fibers that you're painting. So you do want some pressure when you're painting on fabric, whatever it is, because the lighter you paint, it may not even adhere to anything that you're painting on. So that might take practice. So that's mostly fabric preparation for any kind of fabric that you want to paint on.
There was a question about whether or not you would do that with silk.
What?
Whether or not you would paint, or whether or not you'd wash your silk on hot.
Oh, silk's a whole nother animal. When I'm painting on fabric, that's silk painting is a whole nother thing, because there's so many different methods of painting and painting on silk. I had, for the longest time, I've been doing it I've been painting banners, not a whole lot of silk banners, but it feels like it's changed over the years. But when I started painting on silk banners, it was just used, I had a resist, I did some pencil line drawings, and then we tried to paint, we use specific silk paint, and now there's like an egg wash that you can use that's a little bit better. And my friend who never used silk paint used regular acrylic paint on his silk banners, which does give it a weird different texture. But when it comes to silk, I don't know, I've never washed it. I just used it straight off the roll. So when it comes to silk, I'm not 100% sure what the difference of it when you wash it, if it does anything to the silk whatsoever. This is design conception. So we usually do some sort of line drawing to try and figure out what we want. Or if this usually when somebody else wants something, us or me and my wife to make, they come up with a design, some items that they would like on their clothes, and then we kind of get a line drawing and kind of color it up and get their approval, on whether they like it or not. One of the best things to do when you're doing it on clothes is to, in my opinion, is to make a bunch of copies, like black and white copies, and cut them out on different sizes that you would like on your whether the dress or a tunic or whatever you're painting on, and then kind of pin it on there, and then step back and hang it up and step back and see if it looks good or not. The balance for painting on clothes is that you don't want to put too much paint on it. So you don't want to paint a huge motif on it, only because it adds weight to the fabric. It pulls on the threads, and it'll make holes in it eventually. So you don't want to put too much paint on it. If you have a design, you don't want to make it too small, because then people can't, from 6 feet away or so, can't tell what it is. It may not look very good. So there's a really fine balance between the two, of making it, just enough that you can see it. So it's going to be a lot of, printing out or drawing out, or do a lot of testing prior to, because you don't want to make those, design mistakes later on. As I was teaching this class, one good idea that I came up with, I think, for doing a bottom of a dress is the bottom panel is that what you can do is you can make a dress and then cut out, make sure there's like a panel that goes along the bottom and have that separate. So paint the panel separately. And that way, if you make a mistake, you're not making a mistake on the finished dress or the finished tunic. And if you don't like, maybe if the bonus of it is if down the line it gets ripped or torn, or you don't like the design you did on it, you could just make another strip and then start all over, do a new paint job or whatever. So yeah, try and make mistakes on something that you haven't already finished, especially when it comes to clothes, because that's a lot of work you already put in making clothes if you make mistakes. So do all the prep, as much prep work as you possibly can. One of the next things is how to get your design on your fabric. Depending on your thickness of your fabric, depending on the color of the fabric, you can use stencils. I've been able to use stencils, and I think that I'll have later on to show you. There's like a sponge that you can pounce what they call pouncing paint, with this little sponge all over it. It gives it a look of stamping. So if you're not comfortable stamping this, using a stencil to get your design on a piece of fabric, and then painting it with a pouncer, it gives it that stamped look, especially if you're not comfortable with stamping. And it's a little bit easier to do, except for you have to clean the stencil if you use it when you're painting, because your stencil ends up getting a lot of paint on it. So if you're just using your stencil just to do the design and then going back and actually hand painting it later, you shouldn't have any problem. If your fabric if you're a sewer or a crafter with fabric, there's ounces. So there's really thin ounce fabric that you can almost practically see through, and then there's a thicker ounce which is heavier. So that will also depend on how you were able to get the design onto your fabric. For example, if you use a light table, sometimes you can put the design on the light table and just put your fabric over it and trace it. But if your fabric is too thick or too dark, sometimes it's hard to see that. For bigger pieces, like when I do camp walls or banners, I can use an opaque projector. That seems to be a better route for me to get the whatever design on there. So those are just some of the ways that you can get your design on your fabric for whatever your design you want to do it. You can, I don't think I even have some. I had some pictures of some favors that I made that you can also do it for. So the one other or two other ways of doing it is freehand. So if you're a really good artist, you can just freehand the line drawing on there and then paint it. The other one is called prick and pounce. This is what they used for many different reasons. The one reason I found it originally was for, I believe, embroidery. So it's a historical way of doing stuff. They've used it for, I think they used it also for illuminated scrolls sometimes. But you can also use it for, there's another way of historically getting your design onto fabric. So basically what you do is you get a picture that you can print out from your printer. You poke a bunch of little holes in it all along the lines of your drawing. And then you can take something that's powder, like powder that'll show up on your fabric. There's chalk that you can grind up that you can do it, or you can buy ground up chalk if you want, or pulverized, that they say, chalk. Depending on what color of the fabric you can use, sometimes you can use like any kind of powder. Now you can buy a lot of these things at, your local grocery store or Walmart or whatever. But they're actually professional, I would consider pricey ones that have a very, like you can kind of see in the picture, these are handmade pouncing tools that you can use a thumbtack, or you can use this really nice wooden brass needle pointed thing. So totally up to you. But after you take off, after you're done pouncing it with the powder and you take it off and you take off your paper, you'll have what's in the bottom right hand corner, which is a rough idea of of your drawing. So it's a lot messy, but sometimes it's just it's a technique that I put in here just because sometimes you need a bunch of different techniques to get your design on your fabric. So I try to include this too there. You know, you might get to it once we just, your light table's not working, or the opaque checker's too big, or whatever. You know, anything that you have in your arsenal where you can go, well, let me try prick and pounce to see if that works. So that's why I included it in there. This in the class. Paint application. So this is the dress I was kind of talking about earlier, where the center of where the body is in the center of the table, and I kind of sprawled it out. So there's two tables in this picture that you can kind of see, and I just, you know, I would paint because when I first started out, I would paint something and wait till it dried before I moved it. I got very impatient because I wanted to do it. So especially when I'm painting huge dresses where the length that I have to paint is well over 150 inches. I don't know how much the biggest one I painted, but if you're painting a border of a giant dress like this, it takes forever. So because they have to line it first and then you have to put paint down. Sometimes, you know, the paint isn't is too opaque, and then I'm putting multiples, and then I have to go back and do what I mentioned earlier, which is black work. So you know, I'm just constantly going around the entire table. So on the left is part of one of the banners that I painted. So, and it kind of shows my shading technique a little bit, but you have to, it's a learning process and seeing what works and what you like, and different colors that you want to use and how you want to paint it. So there are two, and I use every technique, so I'm not one that uses only one certain way of doing anything. Whatever works is what I do. So for instance, the reason that this particular wing lion is on there is because for majority of the paint, the brown and the lion color, for lack of a better word right now, I painted it and I shaded it as I kind of went. The wings, I painted it, I would put down a base coat first, and then I went back and shaded it. It's kind of however I, you know, feel it will work. Sometimes it doesn't work. Shading is easy for me only because I've been doing it for years, but it's not easy for everybody. And paint is not like to shade necessarily when you try and do it. So sometimes you're fighting your paint. So keep that in mind. It's a technique that I learned over time. You may be real good at, and you don't have to shade on things. That's just what I do. So you can just paint directly on whatever you need to, you know, whatever your design is. So these are some of the paints that I use. Like I said at the beginning of the class, I haven't actually looked to see if all these companies are still around, if they're still making paint. I do order from Folkart and Americana, but I'm not sure if Delta Cream Coat is around or not. But when you go to any kind of craft store, you're going to see these little 2-ounce bottles, and it usually covers like a whole aisle, and there will be a whole bunch of different colors in there. And that's how you usually be. They do sell them in bigger bottles, but whatever those little bottles go, especially if you're putting textile medium in it, it does actually make the paint last a little longer because you're making, you're adding something to it. So you get a little bit more paint to it when you're adding the medium into it. Now on the right, you can see that those are different textile mediums that you can buy. The one at Delta Cream Coat is the one I usually buy, but they do have 2-ounce bottles that you can buy too. The one in the middle is the one that you shouldn't buy. That's the one I was telling you that I looked at side of it and said that it came in a medium slow speed, so it would slow down the drying a little bit. So I'm assuming that's for the canvas part when you're painting on canvas for big paintings and for acrylic paints. You're not using oils and stuff like that. Now the other thing that I usually get if you're painting clothes is the Aftercare. What one of the people that we painted clothes for that had block printing on their clothes, we found out that you should not dry clean your clothes. Do not do that. It will take majority of the paint off. So if you want to start all over again, then go ahead and dry clean your clothes, but don't do that. That's what one lady did, and we had to repaint her entire outfit all over again. Washing it, I suggest washing it by hand if you can. Washing it, trying not to wash it as much as possible, unless it gets really dirty. Turning it inside out and putting it on a gentle cycle at the very least, if you can, for your washing machine. Put it in the dryer either just on air or very low heat, because just like the iron, if it gets too hot, it will melt the paint. And if your dryer is on hot or too hot and you put your clothes in there that you painted, your clothes will come out dry, but the painted sections will be sticking to each other. And so you don't want to do that. So be very mindful when you're drying. I suggest hand washing it and letting it hang dry, but not everybody can do that, and I'm able to do that. So, but yeah, cold water, low heat, if heat at all. Again, as I mentioned before at the beginning of the class, ironing, make sure you don't iron directly on the paint. Like if you painted, one side of the fabric and you want to iron it out, make sure that when you turn it over, you're ironing the back. Sometimes a clean old shirt works well. Something that won't have anything that comes off of it, something really nice. If you're going to iron it and iron the back. You can iron the front of it, but what you usually do if you need for some reason or want to iron the front of it for whatever reason, what you do is you have to iron it on very low heat, and then before you do anything, you have to peel off whatever you have on there, like an old shirt or whatever, because some of the paint may have stuck to it. So you can't just like move the fabric down, do some more ironing, just move really fast. You have to be slow and methodical if you're going to do it that way. But if you can, please iron the back of it if you need to iron it. If not, just hang dry it when you're done washing it. These are my final notes, and then I have some more pictures I added today. So majority of when you're painting on fabric, it's a lot of practice. So when I do this class in person, I usually have people paint favors, because it's a little piece of fabric, and if you mess up, and it's not a big deal. So practice as much as possible before you start painting on things. Whatever colors you want to use, however style you want to use. If you can get a sample of the fabric before you even paint on it. I suggest using natural fabrics, cotton, preferably. Everything that has anything artificial in it will stretch, and not only will the paint have a hard time adhering to artificial fabric, but painting it is a pain, because the paint, like, it just moves around. I've accidentally had it. Someone said it was cotton and it was not. So, and the fabric was just like moving all the way, all over the place. So it's horrible. So watch your paint. What I mean by that is, if you're painting something, make sure you have it in your hand, that you're not going to spill it. Whatever your paint is in, make sure it's not within reach where you're just gonna a cat or your hand or a dog or a child or something comes by and hits your table or your hand or whatever and spills your paint. Because once it gets on your fabric, it's almost like an emergency that you may or may not be able to save the fabric from. If it's just on a certain small section, sometimes you could just wash that one small section immediately. But even if you think you've done it super fast, it's still is going to leave a stain or a tint of that color on it. It's really I've done it on banners, and it really freaks me out. It will to you too if you do that. So try and make sure that your paint, whatever you have it in, is not in something that's easily spilled or accidentally spilled on your whatever you're painting.
Without having gone through and made a bunch of mistakes while trying to do things, I don't have any questions right off the bat.
It's a lot of fun. I went from, like I mentioned earlier, as I went and I used to paint scrolls for years, and I did scrolls, and I did it in as a side note, a very special time, I believe, in my kingdom in Atenveldt. I joined right after a couple years after I joined. Our kingdom went from printouts and colored pencils as for scrolls. And then we were very lucky to have two amazing Laurels, one from Vault, one from Locac, moved to our kingdom. And within about 5 years, we were using parchmentine and wash paint. And so I was apprenticed to one of them. And so for a majority part of my life in the SCA, I did scrolls, but for some reason, there's no actually there is no specific reason. I just slowly went from painting scrolls and doing scrolls, doing period scrolls, and then eventually I just started liking painting on fabric better. You know, I just like the process and the availability, and to be able to do it, paint on fabric, and for so many different reasons, for so many different things, which I'll show you in a second. And I got my Laurel right in that transition for me. So depending on who you ask, I got my peerage for Scrabble work or for painting on fabric. And just really quick, for those of you who don't know, within the last 10 years, I could be off depending on what kingdom you're in, but painting on fabric was not looked on kindly. People did not like painting on fabric and didn't like people who did it. It was very, they were looked down upon for a while for whatever reason. They had their own reasons, but if you do it correctly and small, in certain sizes, most of the time when you do this when you paint on dresses and tunics and stuff, from a distance, it almost looks like embroidery. The one thing I keep forgetting to add to this class that I just remembered that I will try and do when I do this class again is that I do have historical references where people did paint on clothes, and for logical reasons. In England, and I believe France and Spain, they did this in theater productions, because a lot of times when they're doing theater, they can't, even glass or anything else, they can't really modify it, an Elizabethan or a Tudor or anything really fancy for a king. But it would be easy to, mix up some paint and put it onto fabric. It also was used like in Italy and some parts in Spain where they did festivals, just like we do now when we paint our faces and whatever for sporting events. People back then would make clothes and they would paint them in for different designs on them, and but they were used only just for specific reasons, like just for plays or just for festivals. It's not like I do it for how I do it now, or have people wear the clothes that we make with paint on it, every day or for every event. It wasn't meant for that back then. There's really no extant pieces, so all the historical information that I have, there's very little for clothes. Now there's some on livery. There are still in existence of things that they use for horses that they paint that are still in existence, but there's no clothes like for people. I have a feeling it's either, like I mentioned, it was only a one-time use or a limited use, or I have a feeling that depending on what they used, a lot of the sealants to keep the paint on the fabric were acidic or caustic and would eat away at the fabric. At the get-go, you're not going to find a lot of remnants of anything out there. So as of yet, there's no clothes, but there's, like I said, there's a lot of livery. There are some banners out there that have been painted. So there is historical reference for it. So as I mentioned, I went from painting scrolls. So what I do now every day is I get to paint these kind of things every day. And so somebody will send you, I have a Google Doc usually that people fill out, and it basically gives me their rough information, and the wonderful wife takes that information and we work together to make a design for them for peerages, and we do it for everybody. So there's not just a certain class or whatever you want to say for SCA people. We do it for everybody. The materials for me cost between $50 and $60, but I am open to tips. So if anyone wants to pay me more, perfectly acceptable. I've had some really wonderful patrons in the past that I will probably be painting banners for them for the rest of my life. But I do this for people who get peerages, and for stepping up and stepping down for king, queen stuff. So I do it a lot. And the designs we've got for this is something that my wife and I started Our friend had us do it. There's actually a disc, a CD that you can get from England that has elements from heraldry in Wales and in most of like Scotland, I think. And they do have different, we never bought it, but there's actually there's more to it. There's like some stuff from Spain and France and Italy. There's different, you can buy different CDs, and it has basically, there are examples that they have of cats, of land, of grass, of shields, of blazons, of helmets. We just got the basic one, which has a lot of information on it. And plus, we've been actually, we would find things that are better that they had in historical reference. Some of the animals are what I like to call highly suspect. You're not 100% sure what it is. You know, it says it's a cat, but it kind of looks like a wet ferret. So I would like this for this particular drawing. I found a cat that looks way better than her heraldic one. So for that's probably why we didn't get the extra ones. But this is just one that I did. Like I said, I did a cat, and there was the monkey that they had heraldic we didn't like, so I found a heraldic. So I found a monkey that would work way better. It's the same cat. So these are the shields, some shields. I added a lot of their more unique banners that I made. These are like specifically, we've got to modify and did artistic things to it, so it kind of looks nice. And this person chose this one's more unique than a lot of them. So like I said, I used a lot of like you can't really tell, but the gold is the Lumiere, and so is the dragon, where I'm able to use like 2 or 3 different metallic paints. This one I did for one of my households is the Knights of St. Michael. So I did that for the household. And I think either just the way full achievements are normally, I make them for people, and then sometimes they get a peerage, or they step up as a baron, or they get court baroncy, or whatever, you know, accolade they get. And I'm usually, every banner I've ever made, I'm still able to go back and add it somewhere onto the banner and then give it back to them. So, and I don't know if it's just how from the CD, or if just, like I said, the way full blazons are made, you know, when we do a full achievement for somebody, what it looks like. This specifically is something that I did for two of my baronies, because every job I get, and I was champion, ANS champion for both these baronies, is even if it's a job, whether it's a champion or an office, I try and make sure that everybody previous from me gets recorded. So one of the first things I do when I take over anything is I find out who was before me, because those are the shoulders that I stand on, and I'm able to do and have fun in the essays because of those people. So for ANS champion, I made these banners so that everybody always knew the champions that came before me, and I update it. I'm very lucky and blessed that every year the new champion lets me update it. So I take that on myself, like doing it. This is the dress. This is one of the dresses I did for Dina, who's a countess now of the Outlands. I did this for her. She didn't wear it for her stepping down. She wore it after she stepped down. So this is the clothes she changed into. And she has, you know, she liked the, you know, the Celtic, the Irish shamrocks on there, and the flowers and the roses and everything else. I'm not sure. I did a little bit of shading for the rose, but you can't really tell. But this is how I set it up on the table. I didn't do the center, paint the center like that, but I did that just to show everything that I did to it. But for the border, this is where I painted and kind of moved around the table, so I could do all the stuff. I think some of it also I painted before it was put on the dress, but when you're block printing, it's a whole nother process that I don't include in this class, but sometimes you can block print the whole entire fabric and then go back and cut it. There's ways to make your clothes and then block print, which is a little harder. But we try not to, like, if it has a lining, we try to make sure the lining is not fully on yet, just so that way if I make a mistake or if I do something, you know, we can fix it. We have room for error, is what I usually try and say. These are corks that I made, really simple. A lot of these things I'm going to show you is stuff that you could do for your, your baroning, for your kingdom or whatever. Just simple stuff that you can do to paint on fabric, just so that they have, so you can do something. So you can then, there's a lot of stuff that you can do on paper and fabric, painting when you are painting on fabric. And these are a bunch of quotes that I made for our baronies for Australia War. These I made. I didn't include really good picture. Basically, what these are seat savers. So basically, this is one piece of fabric, and it has your device on one side, and or the barony or the kingdom on the other side. And basically, this is to put on seats for court or for whatever you're doing, or so that you can come back, so people know one where you're at, and knew that it saves your seat. So we would take, me and our friends, obviously all of my friends here, would take them to court, and I put strings on them. So this is the first draft. I did notice that they kind of slip one, they're not great once you're sitting to stay on the seat, but if just to hold the seat or as a seat placemat, as a seat marker. I was going to actually try and do these for Australia War for the visiting B&Bs and the visiting ground, but I was never getting around to it. But I made these for all the people in our household. This is another huge project. This is my feast. This is the feast hall from my Knights of St. Michael household. So what I did, if you can kind of see in the bottom right hand corner, I did a full achievement for all the knights and the people, and also for everybody in the household. And I put them along the wall. And I had an idea for the ceiling. So I believe I didn't look it up earlier. This should be St. George's Chapel or Hall. I always get those two confused. This is one of the buildings that caught fire a while ago, and they had to rebuild it. And I tried to find, when I was doing this project, it's just trying to find details like how big these shields are and everything else, and I couldn't get it. So I kind of guessed. So what I did, and I didn't want to paint the top of the ceiling of the pavilion, obviously. So basically what I did is I got a long piece of fabric, and I designed it so that way when it would go up and over the center of the pavilion, all of the shields that you can see there are all the knights of St. Michael. Why it's that pattern, I have no idea. There's probably a reason for it, but I never found it out. But in this picture, there's two, and I'm not 100% sure, but I think they're full now, and I have to do a third one. But and you also can't tell either, but I framed it. So what I did is I took a roller that you basically use to get wood grain, and what I did is I put where would be wood framed on the ceiling, and I put that part over a 2x4, and then I just rolled over the roller. So you can't really tell too well, but if you were able to look really close, it still has wood grain, so it looks like it's got a frame in it. So yeah, it's all been an experiment to try and make sure it stays straight and everything else. So every year it was like, that didn't work type thing. So I think this last year, if I was able to get it up in the pavilion, I think I probably would have fixed a lot of the mistakes. So, but these are a lot of things that you can do. If you want to paint on something there, you can do. There's a lot of things for it. So, with that is the end. So after me talking for that long, does anybody think of a question they might want to answer or they need answered? There was a lot. Look, I just saw the chat. So if you copy the link to my handout, for those who don't know, as long as you have that link, whatever I do to change the original handout, it will change when you reopen it again. So I'm going to endeavor to make sure that I don't forget this time, and maybe in about give it at least a week or so, and I will include all the historical references at the end of that handout of where they did painting on fabric in history. There is a wonderful lady, Mistress Bridget, who I believe is in Atlantia. It's maybe in Trimaris. Anyway, she's been painting. She was the one that's been painting on fabric since the 70s, and she did a lot of stuff that I'm just shocked at that have lasted this long. her story is that she was painting her house and she realized that the paint was, was having a hard time coming out of her clothes. So if it came out, it was hard to get out of her clothes, then she probably could paint, really nice stuff on fabric and and it would probably last. And she does, I think, still does have a dress that she painted back then, and it's still, she only has to touch it up every once in a while. And she's the only one that I know that somehow she did the opposite of against one of the suggestions I had, is don't doing large pieces. She did all these large motifs over the entire dress, this gigantic dress, and it must be really, really heavy. But it's lasted over the years. And she used latex house paint. So that's what, whatever you're able to use. But as long as it has it's flexible when it dries, it should be okay. I've had some issues over the years only because people wear some of the clothes that I've made over and over and over again. And I've learned a lot of things over the years where not to put paint and have to put it on certain sections. So because for instance, one of the dukes that I know that I painted a tunic for, the ones I painted on the back got rubbed off right around the back of the leg because they're sitting, they're constantly up and sitting up and standing up. And the ones on the dresses aren't as big as a problem. It's just for some reason, if I do it on a tunic, just at that particular point. And to this day, he won't let me have it back to fix it. So he really wants to keep it. So, but if you have any questions, my email's on the handout. If you ever want to do any of the stuff for, I just listed some of the things that I've painted on fabric, but I painted a lot of different things on fabric. For instance, if sometime in the future, if you would like me to teach again, or if I'm able to teach again, this kind of spot. I did a whole class this morning on how to do faux brass rubbings using paint for walls for our encampment. So that was a fun class that I did. And then I just used regular paint, which is a fun process.
Do you have any suggestions for getting paint off of concrete when somebody did not put down a shower curtain behind the very large piece they painted?
No, I would. The funny thing I can add to that is I made a mason jar full of oak gall ink, and I went outside, shake it up.
Ooh.
And it came out of my hand. Got all over the patio and exploded. So, but for some reason, that's over years of weathering. It just came out. So, not sure about getting it out of concrete though.
Neither are we.
Yeah, you just gotta be. I sometimes I spill paint too, and it's just you just have to be really careful because the paint will get. For some reason, I don't know if I've never actually delineated whether it's specific colors, but it seems like black, if you're painting with black, it will get, you have to check your arms and your hands. And sometimes every once in a while to see if it got somewhere where you didn't intend for it to get, it's sometimes just paint you're like, where did that come from? I don't remember putting my hand down on anything. So that's one thing I think just paint instinctively has to just be, anywhere and you're just not noticing it getting in yourself. So
it's like chocolate. When you're eating the illicit chocolate ice cream bar. Yes. Yeah. Especially in the car.
And or if you see chocolate on your hand, you really need to debate whether is it chocolate? Did I touch anything? Who touched me? Where did I go? I'm just gonna wipe it off.
Exactly. No, it's wonderful. There are so many applications for painting on fabric. It's very exciting to hear the conversations about the different things, because we've only done the large scale piece that Clovis did that can actually be seen from space on the Google Earth map picture of our property. So
I think I'm not 100% sure. I have painted one of the kingdoms, I think, painted the top of their pavilion. I think painted their kingdom's thing on the top of their pavilion. Oh, the one thing I suggested, which I have no idea if anybody ever did, but I've never been a regalia officer, but I always try and urge people that are doing regalia and in charge of regalia to do certain things, because sometimes trailers just disappear, and that's a horrible thing.
Mhm.
So one of the suggestions that I had was someone to paint the top of their trailers with their baronial symbols on it, with a phone number or something in case it gets stolen. If a helicopter actually sees they're hopefully they'll notice. It's like, wait a minute, what if, that's more of a something that maybe someone steals it will not go up on the top to see if it's whatever it is. But that was one of the suggestions I had. And I have no idea if anybody actually ever did it, but in general, I paint. So I painted wooden chests. I've made leather. I painted gauntlets for some weird reason. I painted almost every kind of material. Like if it can be painted, I painted on it. So. And fabric is just something that's just that I've gotten into painting over the years. But because of people like Mistress Brigitte and a few others in our society who've come up, who've actually had, there was one lady in our kingdom, Viscountess Victoria, have researched and found all that documentation of actual written documentation of people painting on clothes. So, which I personally only found out from them, I think 5 years ago or something like that. But I only had a woodcut and a general description of a festival where people were painting on fabric. But now the list is quite extensive on different books you could buy. And there was when I started, there was a lot of books that were referenced, and it was referenced from an age, for those who haven't been in the SCA a long time, referenced from the age where that one person had the book. That was the book. And if you didn't have that book, then you couldn't prove it, you couldn't prove anything. But the books were like $400. So only one person could buy it, and it was never in the library type stuff. So, but now almost anybody, with the references that I will put on my handout, I'll also put the books that have a lot of those information in it. I'm always on the lookout to see if there's anything new historical that comes up with painting on fabric.
So on that note, is there a specific area of the world that it was more common? Is that an area of knowledge for you? Like, do you know, was it being done more in like Africa or China?
No, well, the only ones, obviously, really the only ones I research are just like the most of Central Europe.
Okay.
The only one that I still am baffled at why they didn't is Vikings. They painted a lot of different stuff, and there's probably a reason why they didn't paint their fabric for whatever reason, but I don't see why they maybe didn't paint something fabric wise. It seems like they would have for some reason. From all the research I've done about Norse, whether wherever it comes from, and the stuff that they've done artistic wise, I'm just it always surprises me when I do always look, but I'm always surprised that I don't find something that they painted that was fabric.
Yeah.
Yet I haven't found it yet. So I tell a lot of people that too. My yet is a lot of thing that I do when it comes to art that you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of saying I don't know how to weave, I go yet. Don't know how to do things yet. So I try to encourage people not to limit themselves from never experiencing or learning any art. And I also say it to people who say, this is historical fact. But I say, as of now, yet we haven't found anything to correct that. So as of today, yes, that is actually, the facts that we know. But it could change tomorrow. So
yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to hear of the shift, because I my persona is Andalusian. Muslim Andalusian from the 10th century. And so fancifying my clothes can be a little tricky. And painting, it's going to be a lot easier than doing some of the embroidery. So
Yeah, but just lots of practice on what you want and how you want to put it on there.
yeah, definitely. Especially since so much of it is geometric and they didn't do representations of the real world. So there, you didn't have animals, you didn't have, so it's all very beautiful, which is part of the reason I love it so much. Beautiful geometric pieces. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to imply that painting is easier than embroidery, just that in this case, for my brain, it's gonna be.
Right. The only thing that I did not mention that I've only done on a limited basis because it was a trial thing is that I did paint someone's elevation dress, and the paint was starting to chip off, and I got before even parts of it even went out. So paint goes bad. Paint is not forever. You can't have paint in the jar and not worry about it. All paint goes bad eventually. And so I was like, oh, I might as well buy a big jar. I use a lot of it, right? And then I had a paint where all the white came off, just the white. Everything else was on there, but the white came off. And I realized that I'd had that white for a very long time, and it came off. But for the elevation dress that I did, I was worried about it coming off. So what I thought was the solution, which is there is a matte finish, or what I ended up using ultimately at the end is an ultra matte finish. But there's an acrylic finish that you can use that has a medium in it that will dry clear. I unfortunately did just the regular acrylic sealer, and it basically turned what I was trying to make the illusion of a embroidered rose. It made it look artificial and almost like a sticker. So it kind of ruined it. So she didn't care. But the ones I made after that, I found ultra matte clear acrylic sealer, and that worked out great. So if ever I was really kind of tentative if they're going to really overuse whatever I made for them, I tried to use that as something to help make sure the paint doesn't come off. And what it does ultimately is when you paint fabric and the paint dries, you can't really tell unless you hold it up to the light, but it pulls all of the threads together in certain areas. So it leaves little tiny holes in it, which you really can't see normally unless you look through light or you look really close. The advantage of putting the acrylic sealer on there, unfortunately, it does add weight, but it fills all those little holes with clear acrylic paint, basically. So it adheres it more to the fabric. So the plus side of that, it adheres, more fabric, more of the paint to the fabric, but then again, it adds weight to it. And then if it gains too much weight, it'll start pulling on the threads, and then that's where you get like holes and different stuff like that. So you have to be really careful. But yeah, we paint a lot of trim stuff. Usually right now I'm having my apprentice paint most of my clothes. All the clothes that we need are usually commissioned. I usually have her do it because she's very methodical. Things have to be spaced a certain, these have to be, and so when it comes to that kind of stuff, I'm like, yeah, please go for it. You need to do it. She has this, we had a word for it. I think it was called chaotic something. But basically, it's a semi of something, and she measures it out. So it's a semi, but if you had to measure them out, they're all equally spaced. Fabric. Yeah. But she likes doing it. So
I understand that.
Yeah. And we've been painting a lot of tunics for fighting too over the years, and for different groups, which I'm still not 100% sure on how the word of mouth gets that direction. But we have different, not just SCA, we get a lot of different other groups seeing if we can paint certain different things on clothes and stuff. So we're always looking for something to do when we're painting. So
Well, our group has been kind of quiet as far as questions. a lot of people are more comfortable if they're not being recorded. So I'm gonna, if you want to give like some final words, then I'll end the recording and then we can go from there.
No, I just want to say that if when you're painting, there's the the major points of just making sure that you practice a lot on different kind, on fabric, whatever design, see what works, see what paint works for you, test things out, test out brushes, test out different designs and how you want to put stuff on. See, just do a lot of experimenting, and be able to learn from a lot of mistakes. So whatever mistakes you make, you're going to make. Learn from them and do that, but also more, another important aspect of it is, I mentioned in the class, is to keep your paint away from arm's length. If you're gonna paint something, put it in your hand that you're not gonna let go and you're not gonna spill. But don't. It's hard not to. It's really, really hard not to put it on the fabric and set it on the fabric, or set it somewhere near the fabric so that you can get to it and just go back and forth with your paintbrush. But if you can manage it, try not to do that, because like I said, it only takes one weird move or one gesture. You don't even think it's going to do it, and the paint goes on your project. And it's one of the, if you've been working on it for for an extended amount, put a lot of effort into it, paint spilling on your project is devastating. So that's all. And again, my handout was in there, and we're going to include it. And on there is also my email address, that you can email me, or you can find me on Facebook, and I'll show you more fabric painting stuff, or if you have any questions about anything. But anything other than that, thank you all for attending my class. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you so much.
It's been a wonderful class.